Have you ever controlled a $1 billion empire only to be slapped by your husband's mistress and called a useless house decoration in your own lobby? That blow was the sting of vile betrayal. But remember, when a decoration falls, it might shatter. But when a queen walks away, the world shakes beneath her heels. Listen to how I lost a terrible husband but regained my crown, dignity, and found a love worthy of my soul. My name is Imogen Brightwell. And at 34 years old, I have learned that the strongest structures are not always the ones made of steel and concrete, but the ones forged in silence and endurance. As the Gulfstream G550 began its final descent into O'Hare International Airport, the cabin lights flickered briefly, a subtle acknowledgement of the turbulence outside. Chicago was greeting me not with a warm embrace, but with a biting, ferocious snowstorm that obscured the skyline in a veil of aggressive white. I pressed my forehead against the cool plexiglass of the window, watching the wings of the jet slice through the heavy, swirling clouds. The pilot had warned of crosswinds, but I hardly felt the shudder of the fuselage. My internal equilibrium had been tested by far greater forces than a winter squall over Lake Michigan. I had been away for 6 weeks. To the casual observer, or even to the lower-level employees of Vanguardia Design. This was just another business trip. But in the rarefied air of high-stakes architectural development, it was a conquest. I had spent the last month and a half navigating the winding, sun-drenched roads of Carrara, Italy, negotiating with a stubborn family of quarry owners who had held the rights to a specific vein of marble for 3 centuries. They did not trust corporations. They did not trust Americans. But they trusted stone, and they eventually came to trust me because I spoke their language, not just Italian, but the language of geology, of grain, and of timeless persistence. I reached into my briefcase, a slim portfolio of hand-stitched leather, and ran my fingers over the edge of the contract inside. It was done. Vanguardia Design now held the exclusive global rights to the Calicata Viola quarries for the next decade. The estimated value of this deal was over $500 million in projected revenue. It was a staggering sum, a number that would send ripples through the stock market and solidify our dominance in the luxury sector for a generation. It was my triumph, born of my vision and my relentless negotiation. Yet, as the wheels of the jet kissed the tarmac with a violent screech of rubber meeting frozen asphalt, my first thought was not of my own glory, it was of Julian. This was for him. Everything I did, every shadow I stepped into, every accolade I quietly deflected, was for Julian Thorne. I closed my eyes as the jet taxied toward the private hangar. Letting the fatigue wash over me, it was a bone-deep weariness, the kind that settles into the marrow. I was the sole heiress to the Brightwell legacy. The daughter of a man who had reshaped the Chicago skyline. By all rights, I should be the CEO of Vanguardia. I was the brain, the aesthetic soul, and the financial architect of the firm. But I had chosen a different elevation for my life. I had chosen to be the load-bearing wall hidden behind the drywall, invisible but essential, so that Julian could be the facade. I remembered the days when Julian was just a hungry young architect with frayed cuffs and eyes that burned with a desperate need to prove himself. He had talent, yes, but he lacked the pedigree and the ruthless instinct required for the boardroom. When we married 8 years ago, on a day much warmer than this one, he had held my hands and sworn a solemn oath. He promised that he would take the weight of the administration, the politics, and the board members off my shoulders so that I could simply create. He wanted to protect me. It was a beautiful sentiment. Over the years, I had handed him the title of Chief Executive Officer, stepping back to the role of Creative Director. I let him cut the ribbons. I let him take the interviews in Architectural Digest. I let him believe he was the king, because I thought a king would never betray his queen. But the foundation had shifted. The car was waiting for me on the tarmac as I descended the stairs, the biting wind whipping my hair across my face. It was not Julian standing by the open door of the black Lincoln Continental. It was Henry, my father's driver, a man who had been with the Brightwell family since before I was born. His hair was now the color of the snow falling around us, and his posture, usually military stiff, seemed slumped under an invisible burden. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thorne," Henry said, his voice roughened by the cold and something else hesitation. He took my carry-on bag, his gloved hands moving with a practiced, gentle efficiency. "Thank you, Henry," I replied, sliding into the warmth of the back seat. The smell of aged leather and faint cedar was comforting. A scent of stability in a world that felt increasingly fluid. "Is the traffic bad coming in from the north?" Henry closed the door and settled into the driver's seat. He met my eyes in the rearview mirror, and for a second, I saw a flicker of profound sadness. He looked away quickly, focusing on the windshield wipers battling the sleet. "The roads are slick, ma'am. It might be slow going." "That is fine," I said, pulling my cashmere coat tighter around me. "I am in no rush to get to the house. Actually, Henry, change of plans." "Take me to the tower." Henry paused, his hand hovering over the gear shift. "To the office, ma'am. It is nearly 5 in the afternoon on a Friday, and with this weather, I know what time it is." "Henry," I said softly, "it is our anniversary, 8 years today." I touched the leather portfolio again. Julian had been distant for the last 6 months. His calls had become infrequent, brief, and transactional. He was always expanding the market, always in meetings, always dealing with a crisis that required him to stay late or travel to New York and Miami. I had told myself it was the burden of the crown I had placed on his head. I told myself he was working this hard for us. I wanted to surprise him. I wanted to walk into his office, drop this $500 million contract on his desk, and watch the stress melt from his face. I wanted to remind him that we were partners, the formidable Thorne and Brightwell team. "As you wish, Mrs. Thorne," Henry said. He merged onto the highway, the heavy car gliding through the slush. The drive into the city was a slow procession through a gray, frozen purgatory. Chicago in winter is a test of character. The buildings loom like iron giants, stripped of their summer softness. As we approached the loop, the density of the city rose up around us, and then I saw it, the Vanguardia Tower. It was my father's masterpiece, and my obsession. A 50-story needle of black onyx glass and steel that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It was stark, imposing, and utterly magnificent. It stood apart from the beige and gray stone of its neighbors, a statement of modernity and power. Seeing it usually filled me with a surge of pride, a connection to my bloodline. But today, as the car pulled up to the curb, a strange knot tightened in my stomach. "I will handle the luggage later." "Henry," I said, opening the door before he could come around. "Wait for me here. I do not expect to be long." "We will go to dinner after I pick up Julian." "Mrs. Thorne," Henry said, turning in his seat. He looked like he was about to violate the unwritten code of the chauffeur to speak out of turn. Maybe you should call Mr. Thorne first. Let him know you are coming." I paused, one foot on the slushy pavement. The wind cut through my coat, chilling me to the bone. "Why would I do that, Henry? It is a surprise." Henry clamped his mouth shut, his eyes dropping to the steering wheel. "Of course. Enjoy your evening, ma'am." I stepped out, the cold air hitting me like a physical blow. I walked toward the revolving doors, my heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic cadence on the granite walkway. This was my building. I owned the land it stood on. I owned the steel in its beams. I owned the company that occupied the top 10 floors. Yet, as I pushed through the glass doors and entered the main lobby, I felt like a stranger. The lobby of the Vanguardia Tower was designed to be a cathedral of minimalism. High ceilings, white marble floors, acoustic perfection that turned footsteps into a soft whisper. It was meant to smell of white tea and silence, but as I stepped inside, my senses were assaulted. The first thing I noticed was the noise. It was not the hushed, respectful murmur of business being conducted. It was a thumping, bass-heavy beat, a generic pop song playing at a volume that was entirely inappropriate for a corporate headquarters. It sounded less like a global design firm and more like a mid-tier nightclub preparing for a happy hour. I stopped in the center of the atrium. Frowning, the receptionist's desk, usually manned by Sarah, a woman of impeccable grace and efficiency, was empty. Instead, a young man I did not recognize was leaning back in the Herman Miller chair, scrolling idly on his phone, chewing gum with an open mouth. I scanned the space, and my heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from aesthetic horror. The beautiful, expansive wall behind the reception desk. A wall I had personally commissioned to feature a subtle, backlit topographic map of Chicago, was covered. It was desecrated. Hung haphazardly over the limestone were 3 massive, glossy posters. They were printed in garish, neon colors, electric lime and shocking pink. The font was a cheap, bubbly sans serif that screamed of bargain basements. Smart pods for smart living, starting at $2,000 a month. The posters screamed. I stared at them, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Vanguardia Design did not do pods. We did not do smart living rentals. We designed opera houses in Dubai, museums in Tokyo, and private estates in the Hamptons. We were the pinnacle of exclusivity. Who had authorized these monstrosities to be plastered over our logo? I looked around the lobby, searching for a familiar face. Employees were crossing the space, heading for the elevators or the exits. I recognized a few of them junior architects, draftsmen, people I had hired. But as they saw me standing there, their reactions were bizarre. They did not smile or nod in respect. They averted their eyes. They sped up. I saw 2 women from the accounting department nudge each other, whisper something behind their hands, and then look at me with an expression that sat somewhere between pity and morbid curiosity. The atmosphere was thick, cloying, and wrong. It felt like walking into a room where everyone had just stopped arguing the moment the door opened. The air pressure in the lobby felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. I tightened my grip on the handle of my briefcase. I was Imogen Brightwell. I was the majority shareholder. This was my house. If standards had slipped in my 6-week absence, I would correct them. If Julian had lost his mind and approved this tacky marketing campaign, I would have a very serious, very private conversation with him about brand integrity. I adjusted the lapels of my camel-colored cashmere coat, smoothing the fabric with a deliberate, calming motion. I lifted my chin, composing my features into the mask of cool, unshakable authority that I had perfected over a decade of boardroom battles. I walked toward the center of the lobby, my eyes scanning for the source of the disturbance, for the reason why my sanctuary felt like a chaotic marketplace. My intuition, honed by years of analyzing structural integrity and spotting microscopic fractures in stone, was screaming at me. It was a low, humming alarm in the back of my mind. This was not just bad management. This was not just a lapse in judgment. This was a structural failure. I took a deep breath, inhaling the air that no longer smelled of white tea, but of cheap perfume and stale coffee. I prepared myself to face the anomaly. I prepared myself to be the boss. But as I took those final steps toward the elevators, I had no idea that I was walking straight into a demolition zone, and the wrecking ball was already swinging toward me. The source of the discord was not difficult to locate. It was a spectacle occurring near the central fountain, a sleek, modernist water feature that was currently dry, presumably another cost-cutting measure implemented during my absence. A crowd had gathered, forming a loose, hesitant circle. These were my employees, junior architects with dark circles under their eyes, marketing assistants clutching tablets, and interns looking terrified. They stood like spectators at a car crash, unable to look away yet paralyzed by a mixture of fear and secondhand embarrassment. I moved toward them, my footsteps soundless on the marble. The crowd did not notice me at first because their attention was entirely captivated by the figure in the center. She was a girl who looked no older than 23, in the dead of a Chicago winter, while everyone else was wrapped in wool and down. She was dressed as if she were attending a pool party in Miami. She wore a dress made of some shimmering synthetic pink material that clung to her body like a second skin, cut dangerously low at the chest and high at the thigh. A white faux fur jacket hung loosely off her shoulders, serving as a prop rather than clothing. Her makeup was heavy, designed for the harsh ring light she held in her left hand, while her right hand gripped the latest model of an iPhone, pointing it aggressively at the floor. But it was not the floor she was filming, it was a person. Cowering near the girl's feet was Elena. I knew Elena. She was a 60-year-old woman from Poland who had cleaned the Vanguardia offices for 15 years. She was a woman of immense dignity who took pride in the shine of the brass railings and the clarity of the glass. Now she was on her knees, frantically dabbing at the floor with a rag, her hands trembling. "Look at this, guys. Look at what this incompetence looks like," the girl in the pink dress shrieked at her phone, her voice pitching up into a performative whine. She pivoted the camera to face herself, pouting her lips in a way that was meant to be cute but looked merely grotesque. "I am literally shaking right now. I come into the office to check on my creative team, trying to be a boss babe, and this clumsy old woman ruins my day. Look at my shoes." She pointed the camera down at her feet. She was wearing a pair of heels that were undeniably expensive, red-soled, encrusted with crystals, and completely impractical for an office environment. There was a tiny, almost invisible droplet of water on the toe of the left shoe. "These are limited edition," the girl hissed, turning her glare back to Elena. "Do you have any idea how much these cost? My husband bought these for me." "Daddy CEO bought these for me because I am the face of this brand, and you just splashed mop water on them like it is nothing." The phrase "Daddy CEO" hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. The air in my lungs seemed to freeze. I watched as Elena looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "I am sorry, miss," Elena stammered, her accent thick. "I did not see you. I was mopping the snow. Please, it is just water. I clean it." "You do not touch them," the girl screamed, jerking her foot away as if Elena's touch were contagious. "You are going to ruin the crystals. Ugh, the smell of cleaning fluid is making me gag. Why do we even hire people like this? Can we not get robots? I'm going to tell Julian to fire you. Seriously, you are done." The crowd of employees shifted uncomfortably. I saw looks of disgust, but also palpable fear. They knew who she was. They knew her power came not from competence, but from proximity to the throne. If she could call the CEO Daddy and Julian in the same breath, she was untouchable. I felt a cold, hard rage crystallize in my chest. It was a familiar sensation, the same icy clarity I felt when I spotted a structural defect in a blueprint. This girl was not just a nuisance. She was a stress fracture in the foundation of my company. Before I could step forward, a man pushed through the crowd. He moved with a grace that was distinct from the nervous shuffling of the others. It was Lucas Sterling. Lucas was the general counsel for Vanguardia, a man I had known since we were children playing in the sandboxes of Lakeshore Drive. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit, his dark hair swept back. He was the anchor of reason in the chaotic sea of the corporate world. Seeing him there gave me a brief flicker of warmth, but it was quickly extinguished by the scene unfolding. "Sierra, that is enough," Lucas said, his voice calm, baritone, and authoritative. He stepped between the girl Sierra and Elena, effectively shielding the older woman. "Put the phone away. You are making a scene, and you are harassing a member of the staff," Sierra scoffed, rolling her eyes so hard it looked painful. She did not lower the phone. Instead, she shoved the camera into Lucas's face. "Oh, look, it is the fun police," she narrated to her live stream, her tone dripping with disdain. "This is Lucas, the lawyer. He thinks he runs the place, just because he reads contracts all day. Boring, Lucas. Move. You are blocking my light." "I am asking you to stop," Lucas said, his jaw tightening. "This is a place of business. You are violating HR policies regarding workplace conduct." "HR policies," Sierra laughed, a sharp, grating sound. She reached out and shoved Lucas's chest with her free hand. It was a disrespectful, physical violation that made several people gasp. "I am the policy. Julian told me I can do whatever I want to fix the image of this stuffy old company. I am the creative visionary. You work for us. Remember, you are just a hired suit. Go push some papers and leave the real work to the talent." Lucas stood his ground, but I could see the frustration radiating off him. He was a man of logic fighting a creature of pure, chaotic entitlement. He could not physically restrain her without risking a lawsuit, and she knew it. Then, he looked up. His eyes met mine across the lobby. For a second, his composure faltered. His eyes widened, flashing with a mixture of shock, relief, and sudden, intense worry. He took a half step toward me, his lips parting to say my name. I raised a single gloved finger to my lips. Silence. I did not want to be announced. I did not want fanfare. I wanted to see exactly how far this rot had spread. Lucas understood immediately. He gave a microscopic nod and stepped back, crossing his arms, his gaze returning to Sierra, but his posture slightly more relaxed. He knew the cavalry had arrived. I adjusted my grip on my portfolio and began to walk. The click of my heels was distinct, a sharp staccato that cut through the ambient noise of the live stream chatter. The employees parted for me, though they did not know who I was. They simply reacted to the aura of absolute, unwavering purpose that I projected. I stopped 3 feet from Sierra. I did not look at her phone. I did not look at her face. I looked at Elena. "Elena," I said softly. "Please stand up." Elena looked at me, confusion clouding her tear-filled eyes. She did not recognize me immediately in my winter coat and sunglasses, but she responded to the tone of command. She slowly got to her feet, clutching her mop handle. "Thank you," I said. Then, I turned to Sierra. The girl was staring at me, her brow furrowed. She had lowered the phone slightly, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, but the camera was still rolling. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice losing some of its performative shrillness, but retaining all of its arrogance. "I am someone who expects this lobby to be a place of professionalism, not a playground for tantrums," I said. My voice was low, modulated, and cold as the wind outside. "Turn off the phone, now," Sierra blinked. Then a slow, nasty smirk spread across her heavily painted lips. She raised the phone again, pointing the lens directly at my face. "Oh my God, guys, look at this," she laughed, addressing her invisible audience. "Another Karen has entered the chat. Who let these people in off the street? Security is so lax today." She stepped closer to me, looking me up and down with exaggerated scrutiny. I was wearing a coat from Loro Piana, a garment that cost more than her entire outfit combined, but to her untrained eye, it was just a beige coat. Underneath, I wore a cream silk blouse and tailored trousers from the row. It was the uniform of quiet wealth, of power that does not need to shout. To Sierra, it was invisible. "Lady, do you know where you are?" she sneered. "This is a design firm. We are about the future. We are about style." She gestured vaguely at her own neon pink dress. "Look at you. You are wearing beige. You look like my grandmother's couch. You have absolutely no taste. Zero drip." I stared at her, fascinated by the sheer density of her ignorance. "I am asking you once," I said. "Stop harassing the staff and remove yourself from this lobby." "Or what?" Sierra challenged. Stepping into my personal space, she smelled of cloying vanilla perfume and desperation. "You are going to call the manager newsflash. Grandma, my husband owns this company. Well, he is the CEO, which is basically the same thing. This is my house. I am the queen bee here. And you are just some random, dusty old woman trying to lecture me in my own territory." My husband, my house, the words echoed in my head, bouncing off the sleek black glass of the walls my father had built. The audacity was breathtaking. She truly believed it. She believed that sleeping with Julian gave her ownership of my heritage. I did not engage with her delusions. I turned my head slightly, looking toward the security desk where the head of security, a man named Marcus, was standing. Marcus had been with us for 5 years. He was a former Marine. "Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the space. Please remove this woman from the building. She is creating a disturbance and harassing an employee. Marcus looked at me. He looked at Sierra. Then, he looked at his shoes. I can't do that, ma'am, Marcus mumbled, his face flushing a deep red. Excuse me? I asked, my tone dropping another 10 degrees. Mr. Thorne left strict instructions, Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper, filled with shame. Miss Sierra is a VIP. She has full clearance. We are not allowed to interfere with her or her creative process. I am sorry, Sierra shrieked with laughter. A triumphant, ugly sound. See, I told you, I can't do that, ma'am. She mimicked Marcus's deep voice, mocking him. She turned the camera back to me, zooming in on my face. Did you hear that? Guys, the security guard knows who signs his paycheck. This lady thinks she can just walk in here and give orders. Hilarious. She leaned in close, her eyes glinting with malice. You should probably leave before I have them throw you out. You are ruining my aesthetic. Go back to the nursing home. Karen, you are boring my followers. I stood there, motionless. The system had failed. The hierarchy had been inverted. The security I paid for was protecting the intruder. The husband I supported was empowering the vandal. The building I owned was being claimed by a squatter in cheap polyester. It was a perfect storm of humiliation. But Sierra had made one fatal miscalculation. She assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. She assumed that because I wore beige, I was fading away. She did not know that beige is the color of the stone that endures centuries of storms. She did not know that she was not standing on her husband's territory. She was standing on a trap door. And I was the one with the lever. I looked at Lucas. He was trembling with suppressed rage. His hands balled into fists at his sides. I gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet. I turned back to Sierra. You believe this is your house? I asked calmly. I know it is, she snapped. And you are trespassing. Very well, I said. I reached into my bag, but not for a phone. I reached for the truth. Then let us see how well you know the landlord. I ignored the girl standing over me, breathing heavily in her cloud of cheap vanilla scent. I turned my back to her, a deliberate motion that I knew would sting her fragile ego more than any shout could. I crouched down on the wet marble, disregarding the slush and dirty water soaking into the hem of my Loro Piana trousers. I reached out and took Elena's trembling hand. Her skin was rough, calloused from years of labor, the labor that kept my glass tower pristine. Elena, I said, my voice soft but carrying the weight of absolute sincerity. I am so sorry. This is not how we treat people at Vanguardia. Please, let me help you up. Elena looked at me, her eyes swimming with tears of humiliation. She gripped my hand as if it were a lifeline in a storm. I pulled her gently to her feet, steadying her as she swayed. Go to the staff room, I instructed quietly. Take the rest of the day off. You will be paid for the full week. Do not worry about the floor. But the mess, Elena whispered, looking terrified at the puddle. Leave it, I said. It is not the dirtiest thing in this lobby right now. A gasp went through the crowd of onlookers. My comment had landed. Behind me, I heard a sound that was something between a growl and a shriek. Sierra had reached her boiling point. By helping the cleaner, by showing grace where she had shown cruelty, I had effectively erased her authority. I had made her look not like a boss, but like a petulant child throwing a tantrum in a supermarket. Are you ignoring me? Sierra screamed. I am talking to you. Stop acting like a saint. You are embarrassing me in front of my followers. She lunged forward. She did not attack me directly. Not yet. Instead, she grabbed the handle of my leather portfolio, the one containing the $500 million exclusive contract that would secure the future of this company, and she yanked it from my grasp. You think you can just walk in here with your ugly bag and your superior attitude, she yelled. With a violent swing of her arm, she hurled my briefcase across the lobby. It skidded across the polished floor, spinning wildly until it slammed into the base of the reception desk with a sickening thud. The leather scuffed. The papers inside likely jostled. It was a violation of my property, my work, and my dignity. I slowly rose to my full height. I did not look at the bag. I turned to face her. My blood was pounding in my ears, a rhythmic war drum, but my face remained a mask of icy calm. "You have 5 minutes," I said, my voice cutting through the lobby like a scalpel. "Go to your desk, pack your personal belongings, leave your security badge at the front desk. You are fired. If you are not out of this building in 10 minutes, I will have the police remove you for trespassing and destruction of property." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the pop music seemed to fade into the background. Then, Sierra laughed. It was a manic, high-pitched sound, devoid of genuine humor. She threw her head back, her long extensions heavy hair whipping around her shoulders. She looked at the phone she was still holding, addressing her audience. "Did you guys hear that she fired me? This random boomer thinks she can fire me." She stepped into my personal space, her face twisted into a sneer of pure contempt. "You are hilarious. Truly. You think you have power. You have nothing. Do you know who I am? Do you know who puts me in this position? My husband is the CEO of this company. Julian Thorne runs this city, and he adores me. He listens to everything I say. If I tell him to ban you from the premises, he will do it in a heartbeat. He will fire you. He will sue you. And he will destroy your entire family if you look at me wrong." I stared at her, feeling a strange, detached curiosity. "Your husband," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Julian Thorne is your husband." "Basically," she smirked, examining her fingernails. "We are soulmates. He is leaving his dead-weight wife for me any day now. He promised. So yeah, I am the future Mrs. Thorne. Deal with it." "Interesting," I said, my voice dangerously low. "If you are the future Mrs. Thorne, then who am I?" Sierra rolled her eyes, stepping closer until I could see the heavy layers of foundation cake into the lines around her mouth. She poked a finger toward my chest. She did not touch me, but the gesture was aggressive enough to make Lucas, standing in the periphery, take a step forward. I held up a hand to stop him. I needed to hear this. "I do not know who you are, and I do not care," Sierra spat. "You are probably just some jealous, dried-up ex-employee. Or maybe you are one of those bitter women who hate seeing a young, beautiful girl succeed. You are just projecting your misery onto me." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for the first 3 rows of onlookers to hear. "Let me tell you something Julian told me. He told me about his wife. He said she is pathetic. He calls her his little house decoration. Isn't that funny? Because that is all she is. She sits at home, looking pretty well. She used to look pretty and does absolutely nothing while he builds the empire. She is a useless, expensive ornament that he keeps around for appearances. But ornaments get dusty. And when they get dusty, you throw them out and get something shiny and new. Like me." The world stopped. House decoration. The breath left my lungs in a rush, as if I had been punched in the gut. That phrase, it was not a generic insult. It was specific. It was intimate. It was ours. I remembered a rainy Sunday morning 4 years ago. We were lying in bed at the lake house. I had just designed the blueprint for the incomprehensibly complex Solaris Museum project. Julian had traced the line of my jaw with his thumb. Looking at me with what I thought was adoration. "You are the most beautiful thing in my life," he had whispered. "My precious house decoration. You make everything beautiful just by being there." At the time, I had laughed. I had taken it as a clumsy but sweet compliment, a testament to his desire to pamper me. I had let him believe I was just the beauty, hiding the fact that I was the structural steel holding him up. Now, hearing those words coming from the mouth of this vapid, cruel child, the truth crashed down on me with the force of a collapsing building. It had never been a compliment. It had been a dismissal. All these years. while I worked in the shadows to make him shine, while I handed him victories he could never have achieved on his own. He had been laughing at me. He had reduced me, the architect, the heiress, the visionary, to an inanimate object, a trinket, something to be dusted and displayed, and eventually discarded. The pain was blinding, white-hot and searing. It was followed instantly by a wave of nausea. But I did not crumble. I did not weep. The tears that threatened to rise were instantly evaporated by the sheer heat of my fury. The Imogen who had arrived hoping to surprise her husband died in that moment. What remained was something harder, something colder. I looked at Sierra. She was smiling, triumphant, thinking she had won because I had gone silent. She thought she had broken me with her words. She had no idea she had just severed the last cable holding the bridge of my marriage together. "You seem very proud of that title," I said, my voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of restraining the urge to scream. "But you should be careful with decorations. Some of them are made of glass, but some are made of diamond, and diamond cuts glass." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I was done talking to the puppet. It was time to cut the strings. I unlocked the screen to call the head of human resources directly. "I am calling HR," I stated flatly. "You are being removed, now." Sierra's eyes widened. The realization that I was not backing down, that her threats and insults had not sent me running, seemed to short-circuit her brain. She saw the phone in my hand as a weapon. She saw her narrative, the victimized influencer, the powerful mistress, crumbling in real time. Panic flared in her eyes, wild and primal. "Put that away," she shrieked. "You are not calling anyone. You are not ruining my career. Julian loves me. He hates you. Stop it." She lunged. It happened so fast that even Marcus, the security guard, could not react. Sierra closed the distance between us in a single stride. She did not reach for the phone. In a blind, flailing fit of rage, she swung her arm. Crack! The sound was explosive. It echoed off the marble walls, sharper than a gunshot, louder than the slamming of a door. Her palm connected with my left cheek with the full force of her body weight. My head snapped to the side. The impact was a shock of white light behind my eyes. A stinging, burning sensation erupted across my face, radiating into my jaw and ear. The force of the blow knocked me off balance, and I had to take a staggering step back to keep from falling. The lobby went dead silent. No one breathed. No one moved. The music seemed to stop. The only sound was the ringing in my ears and the harsh, ragged breathing of the girl standing in front of me. Sierra stood there, her chest heaving, her hands still raised in the follow-through of the slap. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated. For a second, she looked shocked by her own violence. But then, the narcissism kicked back in, twisting her fear into a defensive, ugly snarl. "I told you," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I told you to stop. House decorations should stand still. You do not get to move. You do not get to speak. You just stand there and look pretty until we are done with you. Why did you make me do that? Look what you made me do." She was victim-blaming me for her own assault. She was hysterical, unraveling, desperate to regain control of a situation she never understood. I stood slowly, regaining my balance. I did not lift my hand to my cheek, though I could feel the heat radiating from the skin, could feel the imprint of her fingers beginning to swell. To touch the wound would be to acknowledge the pain, and I would not give her that satisfaction. I tasted blood in my mouth, a small cut on the inside of my lip, where my teeth had caught the flesh. The metallic taste was clarifying. It woke up every instinct in my body. I turned my head back to center. I looked at her. My eyes were dry. My expression was placid, almost bored. It was the face of a statue, the face of a monument that had weathered hurricanes and wars and remained standing. I looked at the girl who was sleeping with my husband. I looked at the creature who had just physically assaulted the owner of the building she was standing in, and in that moment, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The Julian I loved was dead. He had died the moment she spoke that nickname. The marriage was over. There was no conversation to be had, no counseling to attend, no explanations to hear. The slap had shattered the illusion of my life, but it had revealed the steel skeleton underneath. I did not strike back. I did not scream. I simply stared at her with a gaze so devoid of warmth that she actually took a step back, her bravado faltering. "Are you finished?" I asked. My voice was soft, terrifyingly steady. "Because you have just made the last mistake of your life." The soft melodic chime of the executive elevator announced the next act of this farce with perfect comedic timing. The brushed steel doors slid open, revealing the man of the hour, the architect of my misery, and the temporary king of my castle. Julian Thorne stepped out into the lobby, flanked by 3 men in dark suits who carried the distinct, predator air of venture capitalists. Julian looked the part of the successful CEO perfectly. He was wearing a navy bespoke suit from Savile Row, a suit I had selected for him, and his hair was coiffed to perfection. He was laughing at something one of the investors had said. That practiced, rich baritone laugh that used to make my stomach flutter, but now sounded like the rattling of loose change in a tin can. He stopped mid-laugh as the atmosphere of the lobby hit him. He sensed the silence before he saw the scene. The grin slid off his face like oil off glass as he took in the crowd of frozen employees, the puddle of dirty water, the overturned briefcase, and finally, the 2 women standing at the center of the storm. For a split second, he did not recognize me. I was standing in profile, my coat collar turned up, half my face obscured by the swelling that was rapidly coloring my cheek. But Sierra saw her savior. The transformation was instantaneous. The feral creature who had just assaulted me vanished, replaced by a trembling, weeping damsel. She let out a choked sob and sprinted toward him, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. "Julian, Daddy," she wailed, throwing herself at him with enough force to make him stumble back a step. She buried her face in his chest, smearing foundation onto his expensive lapel. "Oh my God. You have to save me. This crazy woman attacked me. She is insane. She threatened to kill me." The 3 investors looked uncomfortable. Taking a synchronized step back, Julian looked down at the girl clinging to him, his face a mask of confusion and rising irritation. He was trying to close a deal. A crying intern was not part of the pitch deck. "Sierra, what is going on?" Julian hissed, trying to peel her arms off his waist. "I told you I was in a meeting. Behave yourself." "I was," she cried, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I was just doing my job, creating content for the brand, and this old hag came in off the street and started screaming at me. She pushed me. She said she owns the building. Look at her. She is deranged." Julian looked up, his eyes finally landing on the old hag. I turned slowly to face him. I lowered the hand I had been holding near my face. I let him see the red, angry mark blooming on my pale skin. I let him see the cold, dead weight in my eyes. The color drained from Julian's face so fast, it was as if someone had pulled a plug in his heel. His tan faded to a sickly, paste-like gray. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again, resembling a fish gasping for oxygen on a dock. The confident CEO vanished, replaced by the terrified fraud he had always been deep down. "Imogen," he whispered, the name strangling him. He shoved Sierra away. It was a clumsy, panicked motion. "Imogen, what? When? You were supposed to be in Italy. You said next week. Why are you here?" "Happy anniversary, Julian," I said. My voice was devoid of emotion. It was flat, dull, and heavy. "I came back early to surprise you. It seems I am the one who is surprised." Julian began to sweat. I could see the beads forming on his upper lip, glistening under the lobby lights. His eyes darted frantically from me to the investors, then to the employees watching with bated breath, and finally to Sierra, who was looking at him with confusion. He went into damage control mode. It was a mode I knew well. It was the same mode he used when he missed a deadline or went over budget lie. Deflect, and smooth it over with charm, but charm does not work on a corpse, and my love for him was stone dead. He forced a stiff, terrifying smile and took a step toward me, holding his hands out as if approaching a wild animal. Surprise, wow. Yes, what a surprise. Honey, look, there has obviously been a massive misunderstanding here. Why do we not go upstairs? My office? We can talk. Just you and me. He turned his head slightly toward Sierra, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, though in the acoustic perfection of the lobby, it carried like a shout. Sierra, go to the marketing floor. Now, we will talk later. Sierra did not move. She looked from him to me, her small brain trying to process the dynamic. Honey, why did you call her Honey Julian? Tell her who I am. Tell her you are going to fire her. Julian looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. He glanced nervously at the investors, who were watching this soap opera with increasing interest. He had to make a choice. He had to choose between his wife, the billionaire heiress who owned the company, and his mistress. But Julian, being a coward, tried to choose neither. He tried to choose the lie. He turned his back to me, shielding his face from my view, and gave Sierra a desperate, pleading look. Then he turned to the investors and spoke in a loud, performative voice. Gentlemen, I apologize for this domestic disturbance, he said, forcing a laugh that sounded like a bark. This is my cousin, my distant cousin, Imogen. She has been going through a very difficult time lately. Mental health issues, very sad. She gets confused about family relations. I have been trying to help her, but she can be unpredictable. He looked at Sierra, nodding vigorously. It is just my cousin, Sierra, Imogen. From the countryside. She does not know how things work in the city. Go upstairs. I will handle her. The lobby went silent again. The audacity of the lie was so immense, so breathtakingly stupid, that it almost commanded respect. Cousin. He had demoted the woman who built his career, the woman he had shared a bed with for 8 years, the woman whose name was on the deed to the building, to a mentally unstable cousin from the country. I threw my head back and laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, lacking any mirth. Cousin, I repeated, stepping closer. Is that what we are now? Last week on the phone, when you were asking me to wire another $2 million into the operating account, you called me your beloved wife. You called me your angel. Now I am a cousin. Sierra froze. Her hands dropped from where she had been reaching for him again. She looked at Julian, her eyes narrowing. Wife, she screeched. She is your wife. You said your wife was an ugly old invalid who never leaves the house. You said she was practically in a coma. She is confused, Julian shouted, sweat now running freely down his temples. He glared at me, his eyes pleading for me to play along, to save his humiliation in front of the money men. Imogen, stop this. You are having an episode. You are jet-lagged. You are delirious. I have never been more lucid in my life. Julian, I said calmly, and I certainly was not confused when your mistress just slapped me across the face in the middle of my own company. She did not slap you, Julian yelled, his panic turning into aggression. He needed to shut me up. He needed to regain control. He turned on the gaslight, cranking it up to maximum brightness. Stop lying. Imogen, why do you always have to be so dramatic? You always make everything about you. Sierra is a valued partner in this firm. She is leading our digital revolution. She would never touch you. You probably tripped. You are clumsy. You are always clumsy. He turned to the crowd of employees, spreading his arms wide. Everyone, back to work. There is nothing to see here. Mrs. Thorne is unwell. She's having a breakdown. He looked at the security guards. Marcus, get over here. Escort Mrs. Thorne to her car. She needs to go home and take her medication. She is not herself. Get her out of here before she hurts herself or someone else. Marcus hesitated. The poor man was caught between a rock and a hard place. He looked at Julian, the CEO he saw every day, and then at me, the shadowy owner he rarely saw, but whose name signed the checks. "Now, Marcus," Julian screamed, his voice cracking. "Do I have to fire you too?" Julian turned back to me, his face twisted in a sneer that revealed the utter rot within his soul. He leaned in close, so only I could hear. "Go home, Imogen. Do not embarrass me. You are just a housewife. You do not understand business. You do not understand what I'm doing here. Go back to your sketches and your garden. Leave the real world to the adults." It was the house decoration sentiment again. Stripped of the cute nickname, he truly believed it. He believed he was the titan, and I was the parasite. I opened my mouth to speak, to eviscerate him with a single sentence about who exactly owned the chair he sat in, but a shadow fell over us, a hand, holding a pristine white linen handkerchief, extended into my field of vision. "I believe you are bleeding, Imogen," a deep, calm voice said. Lucas Sterling stepped between Julian and me. He moved with the slow, deliberate momentum of an iceberg. He did not look at Julian. He looked only at me, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of concern and a terrifying, cold fury. I took the handkerchief. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump. I dabbed the corner of my mouth and pulled the cloth away. It was stained with a bright, crimson spot of blood. Lucas stared at the blood on the white linen. His jaw muscle jumped. He turned slowly to face Julian. Julian took a step back. Lucas was the general counsel. Yes, but he was also a man who boxed at a gym in the West Loop every morning at 5 o'clock. He was broad-shouldered and solid, a stark contrast to Julian's soft, expensive doughiness. "Lucas," Julian stammered, trying to regain his footing. Tell her she needs to leave. She is disrupting business. She is making us look bad in front of the investors." The only person making us look bad, Julian, is the CEO, who just lied about his marital status and ordered security to remove the majority shareholder, Lucas said. His voice was not loud, but it projected to the back of the room. "She is hysterical," Julian insisted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is making things up. She said Sierra hit her. That is a lie." Lucas reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once and held it up. "It is not a lie," Lucas said. "I have been recording for the last 10 minutes. I have the harassment of the cleaning staff. I have the verbal abuse. And I have the assault on video, in 4K resolution. And just now, I have you, on record, denying your marriage and attempting to use company security to silence a whistleblower who also happens to be the chairwoman of the board." Lucas took a step closer to Julian, forcing the other man to shrink back against the reception desk. "I advise you to be very careful with your next words, Julian," Lucas said, his voice dropping to a growl, "because anything you say can and will be used against you in the divorce proceedings, the wrongful termination suit, and potentially the criminal assault charges." Julian looked at the phone, then at me, then at Sierra. Sierra was staring at him with horror. Finally realizing that the cousin lie meant he was ashamed of her, not protecting her, the investors were whispering frantically among themselves and heading for the door. The house of cards was not just falling, it was being incinerated. "You recorded me," Julian whispered, looking at Lucas with betrayal. "You work for me. Lucas, I am your boss." "No, Julian," Lucas said, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. "I work for Vanguardia, and you just became its biggest liability." I lowered the handkerchief. The shock was fading, replaced by a clarity that was sharp and brutal. I looked at the man I had married. He was sweating, lying, and trembling. He was pathetic. "You wanted me to go home, Julian," I asked softly. "I am not going anywhere. This is my building. But you might want to start packing." Julian reached for me again. His hand, manicured and trembling, sought to grip my upper arm, likely to steer me forcefully toward the elevators and away from the staring eyes of the staff. It was a gesture of ownership he had performed 1,000 times in public, a subtle squeeze that looked like affection to onlookers, but felt like a leash to me. "Do not touch me," I said. I did not scream it. I did not need to. The command was absolute. I swatted his hand away with a sharp, decisive motion, as if brushing off a piece of filth. The rejection was so physical, so public, that Julian recoiled as if he had been burned. "Imogen, be reasonable," he hissed, his eyes darting to the investors who were now rapidly retreating toward the revolving doors, clearly deciding that no deal was worth witnessing a felony in progress. "We can fix this. Just stop making a scene." "The scene is already made, Julian," I replied. "Now we are just reviewing the script." I turned my back on him and walked toward the reception desk. The massive LED wall behind it was still cycling through a loop of Sierra's TikTok videos and blown-up Instagram photos, a kaleidoscope of vanity that loomed over the lobby like a dystopian billboard. "Lucas," I said, not looking back. "The file." "Sent," Lucas replied instantly. I pulled my phone from my pocket. As the architect of this building and the primary shareholder of the company, my device possessed a master administrative key that overrode all other inputs in the building's digital ecosystem. It was a fail-safe I had installed years ago, a backdoor I had never expected to use against my own husband. I tapped the screen once, the connection established with a digital chirp that echoed through the lobby audio system. On the massive wall, Sierra's pouting face froze, pixelated, and then vanished. The screen went black for a heartbeat. When it illuminated again, the garish pinks and neon greens were gone. In their place was the stark, unforgiving white of a spreadsheet. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of employees. They knew what this was. They lived their lives in these rows and columns. It was a financial ledger. "You called this woman your partner," I said, my voice amplified by the lobby's acoustics, turning the space into a courtroom. I pointed a finger at the screen without looking at it. "You claimed she is a vital asset to Vanguardia. Let us examine the nature of this partnership." I swiped on my phone, highlighting a specific row on the giant screen. The text zoomed in, crisp and undeniable. "Asset acquisition," I read aloud. "Purchase of residential property, Unit 4B, the Elysium Tower, price $5 million, listed owner Sierra Jones, purpose of purchase, satellite office." I turned to Julian. He was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open, his complexion shifting from gray to a sickly green. "Tell me, Julian," I asked, my tone conversational but deadly. "Since when does Vanguardia Design need a satellite office in a residential penthouse that features a private rooftop pool and a wine cellar, and why is the deed in the name of your intern?" Julian sputtered. He loosened his tie, his breathing ragged. That is an investment strategy. Real estate is booming. We needed to diversify the portfolio. It is a corporate apartment for visiting clients." "For visiting clients," I repeated slowly. "Is that why the security logs, which I also have, show that the only two people who have accessed that unit in the last 3 months are you and Miss Jones, and usually between the hours of 2 in the morning and 9 in the morning?" "It is a workspace," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "We work late. We are brainstorming." "Brainstorming," I said dryly. I swiped the screen again. A new document appeared. It was a bank statement from the company's operating account. "Let us discuss the brainstorming budget," I continued. "Transfer to Creative Marketing Fund. Recipient SJ Consulting, LLC. Amount $3 million. Date October 15th. I looked at the crowd of employees. I saw the faces of the junior architects who had been denied their holiday bonuses. I saw the project managers who had been told there was no budget for new software. I saw the exhaustion in their eyes. $3 million, I said, letting the number hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "Julian told the board that we had a liquidity crisis. He told you, the staff, that we had to freeze hiring and cut overtime pay because the market was soft. He told you we had to tighten our belts." I gestured to Sierra, who was standing frozen near the fountain, clutching her purse. "But it seems the belt was only tight for you. For Miss Jones, the coffers were wide open. $3 million transferred to a shell company registered to her home address. And for what? For TikTok videos. For live streaming, abuse of our cleaning staff. Sierra suddenly found her voice. The shock of being exposed had worn off, replaced by the defensive indignation of the entitled. "That is my salary," she screamed, stomping her foot. "I earned that. I am the face of this brand I brought in engagement. Do you know how many likes I get? $3 million is cheap for the exposure I give this boring company. I deserve it." The lobby erupted. It was not a cheer. It was a rumble of pure, unadulterated fury. "I have not had a raise in 4 years," a voice shouted from the back. "You cut our health insurance," another voice yelled. "We are working 80-hour weeks while she buys shoes." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Before, it had been a personal drama, a spectacle of a wife confronting a mistress. Now, it was class warfare. It was the people who built the company realizing they were being robbed by the people who played at running it. Julian looked around, terrified. He realized he had lost the room. He had lost the audience. He raised his hands, trying to quiet the mob. "Listen, everyone, listen," Julian bellowed, desperation straining his vocal cords. "It is complex. You do not understand high-level finance. These are projected earnings. It is all legal. I am the CEO. I have the discretion to allocate funds." "You had discretion," I corrected him. "You do not have the right to embezzle." "It is not embezzlement," Julian insisted, turning back to me, his eyes wild. "It is legitimate business. You are twisting everything because you are jealous. You want to ruin me because you cannot stand that I found someone who actually appreciates me." "Appreciates you." I stepped closer to him. "Is that what you call it?" "I think the word you are looking for is exploits, but the money for the penthouse and the fake consulting fees are just the tip of the iceberg. Julian, we could almost forgive you for being a thief. Greed is a common sin, but what you did next, that is unforgivable." I swiped my phone one last time. The screen changed again. This time, it displayed a set of architectural blueprints. They were complex, beautiful, and undeniably vanguardia. The lines were distinct, the structural geometry unique. It was the design for the Helios project, a massive solar-integrated skyscraper we had been developing for 2 years. It was our flagship project, the one intended to redefine sustainable architecture. Next to it, on the split screen, was a press release from Obsidian Group, our direct competitor. "The Obsidian Tower," I read from the screen, "unveiled yesterday, a revolutionary design featuring a unique solar-integrated facade." I looked at Julian. He had stopped moving. He had stopped breathing. He looked like a man who had just heard the trapdoor snap open beneath his feet. "You stole the Helios blueprints," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "You copied the files from my private server. You removed the Vanguardia watermark, and you sold them to Obsidian Group under the alias JT Holdings." I turned to the crowd, my voice shaking with the rage of a creator whose art has been violated. "He did not just steal money. He stole our work. He stole the thousands of hours you spent drawing, calculating, and engineering. He took the intellectual property of this firm, the very soul of Vanguardia, and he sold it to our enemies for cash." "Why?" I asked, turning back to him. "Why would you destroy your own company?" Julian was trembling violently now. The facade was gone. The charm was gone. All that remained was a small, petty criminal. "Because I knew," he screamed suddenly, his face twisting into an ugly mask of spite. "I knew you were going to leave me. I saw the way you looked at me. Imogen, you looked at me like I was a child, like I was a disappointment. I knew it was only a matter of time before you kicked me out. I had to protect myself." He pointed a shaking finger at me, tears of self-pity streaming down his face. "It is your fault. You were always so cold, so perfect. Imogen the genius. Imogen the heiress. Do you know what it is like to be married to a statue? You never needed me. You never made me feel like a man. Sierra makes me feel like a king. She looks up to me. You just looked through me." He was rewriting history in real time. casting himself as the victim of my competence. He was justifying corporate espionage and grand larceny because his wife was too good at her job. "So you sold the company's future to buy a golden parachute," I said, analyzing him with clinical detachment. "You were liquidating assets before the divorce you assumed was coming. You wanted to burn the house down on your way out, so I would be left with nothing but ashes." "I built this company too," Julian yelled. "I deserve a share if I cannot have it. No one can." "You built nothing," I said. "You managed what I built, and you did a poor job of it." I looked at him, and for the first time in 8 years, I saw him clearly. There was no love left. There was not even anger anymore. There was only the cold, hard realization of a problem that needed to be removed. "You are right about one thing, Julian," I said softly. "I was preparing, but I was preparing to give you the world. I came home today with a $500 million contract that would have secured your reputation for life. I was going to put your name on it." I gestured to the battered leather portfolio lying on the floor where Sierra had thrown it. "That bag contains the Calicata Viola exclusive rights," I said. "It was my anniversary gift to you. I did it so you could finally feel like the big man you so desperately wanted to be." Julian followed my gaze to the bag. His eyes widened. He realized what he had thrown away. He realized that if he had just waited one more hour, if he had just kept his zipper up and his greed in check, he would have had everything he wanted. "Imogen," he choked out, stepping toward me, his hands reaching out in a begging gesture. "I did not know, baby. I did not know. We can fix this. Please, I will call Obsidian. I will cancel the sale. I will get the money back from Sierra. We can start over." I looked at him with profound pity. "You cannot fix a structural failure with paint, Julian," I said, "and you certainly cannot fix a felony with an apology." I turned to Lucas. "Lucas, do we have enough?" Lucas stepped forward, his face grim satisfaction. "We have the bank records. We have the real estate deed. We have the IP transfer logs. And now, we have a verbal confession recorded in front of 50 witnesses." Lucas looked at Julian. "You are not just looking at a divorce. Julian, you are looking at federal charges for wire fraud, embezzlement, and industrial espionage. I would estimate 20 years, minimum." Julian fell to his knees. It was not a graceful fall. His legs simply gave out under the weight of his reality. He knelt on the cold marble floor, surrounded by the people he had robbed, staring up at the wife he had betrayed. "Imogen, please," he sobbed, grabbing the hem of my coat. "Do not do this. I am your husband." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. The man kneeling before me was a stranger. "You are not my husband," I said, pulling my coat from his grasp. "You are a defendant." The silence that followed my declaration was not the silence of peace. It was the suffocating vacuum that precedes a detonation. Julian Thorne, the man who had knelt before me only seconds ago in a performance of pathetic contrition, slowly climbed to his feet. As he rose, I watched a transformation that was both fascinating and repulsive. The fear in his eyes hardened into a manic, desperate arrogance. He brushed the dust from the knees of his bespoke suit, straightened his tie with a sharp jerk, and looked at me with a sneer that twisted his handsome features into something unrecognizable. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a dry, hacking sound. "A defendant," Julian mocked, his voice rising in volume as he tried to perform for the watching crowd. "You really think you can scare me with legal threats? Imogen, you have spent the last decade burying your head in sketches and fabric swatches. You do not know how the real world works. You do not know how this company works." He stepped toward me, invading my personal space again, trying to use his height to intimidate me, but I did not flinch. I stood rooted to the marble floor like a column of reinforced steel. "I am the CEO," Julian declared, thumping his chest with his fist. "I am the one the board listens to. I am the one the investors trust. You are just a name on the letterhead. You are a silent partner. Imogen, Emphasis on silent. You hold nominal shares. Sure, but I hold the proxies. I control the voting rights. I have spent 5 years stacking the board with my allies. You cannot fire me. You cannot even touch me." He turned to the security guards, his confidence surging back on a wave of adrenaline and delusion. "Marcus, I gave you an order. Remove this woman. She is trespassing and harassing the chief executive officer. If you do not move now, I will personally ensure you never work in this city again." Marcus shifted his weight, looking tortured. He looked at Julian, then he looked at me. He was a good man, but he was confused by the chain of command. Julian had been the face of power for so long that the habit of obedience was hard to break. I sighed. It was a soft exhalation of finality. Julian truly believed his own lie. He had convinced himself that because I had stepped into the shadows to let him shine, I had disappeared completely. He had forgotten the fundamental rule of architecture. The facade is nothing without the structure that supports it. I walked over to the battered leather portfolio that Sierra had thrown across the lobby. It lay against the reception desk, scuffed and humiliated. I picked it up, dusting off the leather with slow, deliberate movements. "You are right about one thing, Julian," I said, my voice calm, carrying effortlessly to the corners of the room. "I have been silent, but silence is not weakness. Silence is observation." I unzipped the portfolio. I did not take out the marble contract. Instead, I reached into the back pocket of the case and withdrew a thick bound document with a blue cover. It was the Vanguardia Design Corporate Charter, the original document my father and I had drafted when we incorporated the firm. I held it up. The gold leaf lettering on the cover caught the light. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. Julian stared at the booklet, his brow furrowing. "Paperwork. You are going to throw paperwork at me." "This is the Keystone Clause," I said. "Article 4, Section 2 of the company bylaws. It states that in the event of ethical misconduct, criminal activity, or actions deemed harmful to the reputation of the firm, the primary shareholder, that is me, retains the right to dissolve the board of directors and terminate executive officers without a vote." I opened the booklet to the marked page. "And regarding your claim about proxies, look at the date on this addendum." I held the page out for him to see, but I did not let him touch it. "When I appointed you CEO, I signed a revocable trust agreement. It grants me, Imogen Brightwell, the sole power to revoke all voting proxies at any time, for any reason, and I revoked them this morning, Julian, at 8 o'clock, before my plane even landed." Julian froze. His eyes scanned the document, and the color drained from his face for the second time, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under heat. "I own 70% of the voting stock," I announced, turning to the room so every employee, every intern, and every security guard could hear the absolute truth. "I am not a nominal shareholder. I am the owner. I am the chairwoman. I am the state." I closed the booklet with a sharp snap that echoed like a judge's gavel. "Therefore," I continued, looking Julian dead in the eye, "effective immediately, by the power vested in me by the Charter of Vanguardia Design, Mr. Julian Thorne is terminated from the position of Chief Executive Officer. You are stripped of all titles, all privileges, and all access to company assets. You are fired." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Julian stood there, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The reality was crashing down on him. He had built his castle on sand, assuming the tide would never come in, but the tide was here, and it was a tsunami. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, you cannot. The board serves at my pleasure." I cut him off. "And by tomorrow morning, I will have fired every single one of your sycophants and replaced them with people who know the difference between a profit margin and a felony." I turned my gaze to Sierra. The girl was standing near the fountain, clutching her fake fur jacket, her eyes wide with terror. She had watched her invincible daddy CEO crumble into dust in less than 2 minutes. She realized, with the terrifying clarity of a rat on a sinking ship, that she was alone. "And you," I said, my voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze oxygen. Sierra flinched. She took a step back, her heels wobbling. I did not know," she stammered. "I just did what he told me. I am just an intern." "You are not just an intern," I corrected her. "You are an accomplice. You knowingly accepted stolen funds. You participated in the embezzlement of $3 million. You conspired to defraud this company. And let us not forget the physical assault you committed in front of 50 witnesses." I took a step toward her. "You are fired. Miss Jones, obviously, but that is the least of your problems. My legal team will be filing a civil suit against you for the recovery of all misappropriated funds. We will be seeking damages for the destruction of company property, and we will be pressing charges for assault and battery." Sierra let out a strangled sob. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the floor, right at Julian's feet. She grabbed his leg, her fingernails digging into his trousers. "Julian," she wailed, her voice shrill and desperate. "Do something. You said you would protect me. You said you owned everything. Fix this. She is going to put me in jail." Julian looked down at her. The look in his eyes was not love. It was not even pity. It was pure, unadulterated loathing. He saw her now not as his prize, but as the anchor dragging him down. He saw her as the reason he had lost his kingdom. "Get off me!" Julian screamed. He pulled his leg back and kicked her. It was a vicious, cowardly motion. His expensive Oxford shoe connected with her shoulder, sending her sprawling across the wet marble floor. "You stupid girl!" Julian yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "This is your fault. If you had just kept your mouth shut, if you had not live-streamed everything, you ruined me. Get away from me." A collective gasp went through the lobby. The violence of his betrayal was shocking, even for a man of his low character. Sierra lay on the floor, stunned, looking up at the man she thought was her soulmate. The illusion of their true love shattered into a million jagged pieces. Julian did not even look at her again. He turned to me, his face transforming instantly from rage to pathetic begging. He clasped his hands together, dropping to his knees once more, crawling toward me. "Imogen, look," he pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "I kicked her out. See, I chose you. She meant nothing to me. She seduced me. She is a predator. I was weak, but I'm back now. Please, baby, do not fire me. Do not take the company. We can work this out. I will do anything. I will sign a postnup. I will go to therapy. Just please, do not destroy me." I looked at him, a man who would kick a woman when she was down to save his own skin, a man who would sell his soul for a title. "Lucas," I said, not taking my eyes off the creature at my feet. "Yes, ma'am." Lucas stepped forward. He held up a tablet. "Status report," I commanded. "As of 5 minutes ago," Lucas announced, his voice ringing with satisfaction, "I have executed the Emergency Asset Protection Protocol. All corporate credit cards issued to Julian Thorne and Sierra Jones have been deactivated. The company car lease has been terminated. The security clearance for both individuals has been revoked." Lucas tapped the screen. "Furthermore, I have contacted the bank regarding the joint personal accounts. Due to the evidence of large-scale wire fraud, the bank has agreed to freeze all assets pending a federal investigation. Julian, your personal accounts, your investment portfolio, and your offshore shells are currently locked. You have zero access to funds." Julian stopped crying. He stared at Lucas, his mouth hanging open. "Zero," he whispered. "But I have payments due, the mortgage on the lake house, the car, the investors." As if on cue, the silence in Julian's pocket was broken. His phone began to ring. It was a harsh, jarring sound. He pulled it out with a trembling hand. He looked at the screen. It is the investors," he stammered. He declined the call. The phone rang again immediately. "It is the bank," he whispered. He declined it. It rang again. "It is the landlord of the penthouse." The world was closing in on him. The news of his firing and the embezzlement allegations must have hit the wires. In the age of information, the fall from grace happens at the speed of light. "Answer it, Julian," I said coldly. "Tell them you are no longer the CEO. Tell them you are unemployed." He let the phone drop to the floor. It continued to buzz, vibrating against the marble like a dying insect. "Security," I said. Marcus stepped forward. This time, there was no hesitation in his eyes. He looked at me with newfound respect, recognizing the true alpha in the room. "Yes, Madam Chairwoman," Marcus said, his voice booming. "Escort these 2 trespassers off the premises," I ordered, "and Marcus ensure they leave with nothing that belongs to Vanguardia." I pointed a finger at Sierra, who was sobbing quietly on the floor. "That includes anything purchased with company funds, the phone, the laptop. And if that dress or that coat was bought with the corporate card, as the audit suggests, she leaves them here." Sierra looked up, horrified. You cannot be serious. You want me to leave naked." "I do not care how you leave," I said, my voice void of sympathy. "But you will not walk out of my door wearing my money. You can call someone to bring you clothes. Or you can walk out in your slip. It is your choice." I turned to Julian. "And you? The watch? The Rolex Daytona? I recall the company bought that for you as a performance bonus last year. Hand it over." Julian clutched his wrist, looking at the watch as if it were a limb. "Imogen, please, it is all I have left." "Take it off," I said, with shaking hands. Julian unclasped the watch. He handed it to Marcus. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked exactly like the empty suit he was. "Get them out of my sight," I said. Marcus and 2 other guards moved in. They hauled Julian to his feet. Another guard stood over Sierra, waiting for her to surrender the company property. I did not stay to watch the final degradation. I did not need to see them stripped of their unearned finery to know I had won. I turned on my heel. The crowd of employees parted from me like the Red Sea. I saw their faces as I walked past. There was no longer fear or pity in their eyes. There was awe. There was respect. I walked toward the private executive elevator at the far end of the lobby. I pressed the call button. The doors slid open instantly, welcoming me. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the penthouse floor, my floor. As the doors began to slide shut, I looked out one last time. I saw Julian being dragged toward the revolving doors, shouting incoherently. I saw Sierra weeping into her hands. I saw the ruins of a false dynasty. The doors closed with a soft, pneumatic hiss, sealing out the noise, the chaos, and the past. I was alone in the elevator. I leaned my head back against the cool mirrored wall and closed my eyes. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving a dull ache in my cheek where I had been slapped. But beneath the pain, I felt something else. I felt lighter. The house decoration had fallen off the shelf, yes, but she had not shattered. She had landed on her feet, and she had brought the entire house down with her. Now, it was time to rebuild. The piece of my lakefront estate was a deception. Outside, the winter wind howled across Lake Michigan, whipping the dark water into a frenzy that matched the digital storm raging on the screen of my tablet. It was 9 o'clock in the evening, barely 4 hours since I had purged the infection from my company. But in the hyper-accelerated world of social media, an entire war had already been fought, and I was currently losing. I sat in my library, a room lined with floor-to-ceiling walnut bookshelves and smelling of old paper and beeswax. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. Across from me, seated in a leather wingback chair with his laptop open, was Lucas. He had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, looking less like a corporate attorney and more like a general commanding a bunker during a siege. "They are moving fast," Lucas said, his eyes scanning the scrolling feed of Twitter and TikTok. "The video has 3 million views in 2 hours. They have titled it, 'The Billionaire Bully: How a Jealous Heiress Destroyed a Self-Made CEO.'" I took a sip of the vintage Bordeaux Lucas had poured for me. It was rich and complex, grounding me in the reality of my own home while the virtual world tried to burn me in effigy. "Show me," I said calmly. Lucas hesitated, then turned the laptop toward me. The video was a masterpiece of manipulation. It was Sierra's handiwork, clearly. She had taken the footage from her live stream and edited it with the precision of a propaganda artist. She had cut out the moment she screamed at the cleaner. She had cut out the insults about my appearance. Most crucially, she had cut out the slap. The video began with me standing over her, looking cold and imperious, pointing my finger. It cut to Julian on his knees, begging, looking like a broken man. It cut to me ordering security to strip them of their company property. The audio had been layered with sad violin music. Sierra's voiceover sobbed, narration explaining how she had worked tirelessly for Vanguardia only to be targeted by an insecure, older woman who could not handle her husband having a successful female business partner. "Look at her face," Sierra sobbed in the video. "She has no emotion. She just wanted to hurt us. She took my coat. She took my phone. She left me on the street in the freezing cold." The comments section was a sewer of vitriol. Eat the rich. "This woman is a monster. Boycott Vanguardia. Poor girl. That CEO looks terrified of his wife. Domestic abuse goes both ways. She is just a bitter old hag. Jealousy is ugly." "The narrative is setting," Lucas said, turning the computer back. "They are painting you as the villain and Julian as the henpecked genius who was trying to save the company from your tyranny. The public loves a Cinderella story, even if Cinderella is a lying narcissist in a stolen dress." I set my wine glass down on the coaster. The crystal made a sharp click. I felt a strange lack of anger. Earlier in the lobby, I had felt rage. Now, seeing their desperate, clumsy attempt to rewrite reality, I felt only the cold calculation of an engineer spotting a flaw in the load-bearing calculations. "They are fighting a guerrilla war with smoke and mirrors," I said. Standing up and walking to the window, I looked out at the black void of the lake. They think the court of public opinion does not require evidence. They think whoever screams loudest wins. In the short term, they are right, Lucas noted. "Stock sentiment is dipping. We need to issue a statement." "No statement," I said, turning back to him. "Statements are for politicians. We are going to issue the truth. Is the forensic file ready?" Lucas smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile that did not reach his eyes. The IT team just finished scrubbing the audio on the lobby security tapes, crystal clear, and the forensic accountants just sent over the final breakdown of Julian's personal finances. "Good," I said. "Release it, all of it." "The uncut footage?" Lucas asked. "The uncut footage," I confirmed. "From the moment I walked in until the moment the elevator doors closed. Let the world hear the sound of that slap. Let them hear him call me a cousin. Let them hear him admit to the embezzlement. And the financial records. Publish the redacted version," I ordered. "Hide the account numbers, but show the transactions. Show the world exactly where their self-made CEO was spending his money." Lucas hit the enter key. "Upload initiated. It is going live on the official Vanguardia channels, and I am pushing it to every major news outlet in the city." We sat in silence for 10 minutes, watching the fire. The only sound was the clicking of the keyboard as Lucas monitored the upload. It felt like waiting for a controlled demolition. The charges were set. The fuse was lit. We were just waiting for gravity to do its work. "It is up," Lucas said softly. I walked over to stand behind his chair, placing a hand on the back of the leather. I watched the numbers climb. The reaction was not immediate. It took time for people to watch the 10-minute video. But when the tide turned, it turned with the force of a tsunami. The first domino to fall was the slap, in high definition, from the wide-angle security camera. The violence of Sierra's assault was undeniable. The sound of her palm connecting with my face cracked like a whip through the speakers. The internet, previously defending the poor crying girl, suddenly realized they were defending an abuser. Then came the audio, the clarity of Julian calling me his cousin, the cruelty of Sierra calling me a house decoration, the arrogance, the entitlement. But the final nail in the coffin was the financial revelation. Lucas had prepared a graphic to accompany the data dump. It was devastatingly simple. It showed the timeline of Julian's withdrawals from the company accounts alongside his personal gambling losses. Julian Thorne, I read from the screen, my voice steady. $3 million lost in online crypto casinos in the last 6 months, $2 million in debt to an offshore betting syndicate. But this, Lucas said, pointing to a specific document, is the kill shot. I looked at the image. It was a mortgage deed. He mortgaged his parents' home, I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. The house in Naperville, the one they have lived in for 40 years. He forged his father's signature, Lucas explained, his voice thick with disgust. He took out a second mortgage on their retirement home to cover his margin calls on Lunacoin. He lost it all in 48 hours. The bank is moving to foreclose on them next week. That is why he was so desperate to steal from Vanguardia. He was not just buying a penthouse for his mistress. He was trying to stop his parents from being thrown onto the street because of his addiction. The internet sleuths found this detail within minutes. The narrative of Julian the genius evaporated. In its place stood Julian the degenerate gambler who stole from his wife and sold his parents' roof. The comments section transformed before our eyes. The vitriol that had been directed at me boomeranged back at them with tenfold intensity. Oh my God, did you hear that slap? That girl belongs in jail? He called his wife a cousin. What kind of sociopath does that? He gambled away his parents' house. This man is pure evil. Imogen, Brightwell is a saint for not killing them on the spot. Queen Imogen House. Decoration strikes back. My phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it began to vibrate continuously, dancing across the mahogany desk. It is the sponsors, Lucas said, checking his own feed. Fashion Nova just dropped Sierra. Sephora just issued a statement distancing themselves from her. Her Instagram account is losing 10,000 followers a minute. And Julian? I asked. The district attorney's office just tweeted that they are opening an investigation based on the evidence provided, Lucas said. He is radioactive. I picked up my phone. It was an unknown number. But I knew who it was. I answered and put it on speaker. You witch! Julian's voice screamed through the speaker, distorted by alcohol and panic. You think you are so smart? You ruined me. You put my parents' business on the internet. You ruined yourself, Julian, I said into the phone, my voice calm. I just turned on the lights. I am going to destroy you, he shrieked. I have pictures. Imogen. Private pictures. Remember our honeymoon. Remember the videos. I will leak them. I will post them on every site on the dark web. I will make sure the whole world sees the icy queen naked. Lucas stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for the phone to cut the call. But I signaled him to stop. I did not feel fear. I felt a surge of adrenaline, sharp and clarifying. Go ahead, I said, letting a cold laugh escape my lips. Do it, Julian. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He had expected me to beg. He had expected the shame of a woman to be his final leverage. What? He stammered. Post them, I challenged. But before you do, you might want to ask your lawyer, oh wait, you do not have one anymore. You might want to Google revenge porn statutes in the state of Illinois. It is a Class 4 felony. Julian, and given that you are already facing federal charges for embezzlement and wire fraud, adding a sex crime to your indictment will ensure that you do not just go to prison. It will ensure you are registered as a sex offender for the rest of your miserable life. I paused, letting the reality sink in. Also, I added, everyone knows you are a master of Photoshop now. You faked financial reports. You faked blueprints. Do you really think anyone will believe those photos are real? They will just look like another desperate forgery from a sad, impotent man. You. He could not find the words. The threat had evaporated. He had no ammunition left. Goodbye. Julian, I said, do not call this number again. The next time you speak to me, It will be through a glass partition in a visitation room. I hung up and blocked the number. I stood there in the silence of the library, the fire crackling softly. I waited for the crash. I waited for the heartbreak. I waited to mourn the 8 years of marriage that had just officially ended in a fiery explosion of public scandal. But the grief did not come. Instead, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was expansive. It was light. It was the feeling of taking off a heavy steel corset that I had been wearing for a decade. I realized that for years, I had been shrinking myself to fit into Julian's fragile ego. I had been walking on eggshells, dimming my light, managing his moods, cleaning up his messes, and apologizing for my own competence. I was free. I looked at the reflection in the dark window. I saw a woman with a bruised cheek, tired eyes, and messy hair, but I also saw a woman who was standing tall. The house decoration had walked out of the house, and the house had not collapsed. It was the decorations that made the home, not the other way around. "Are you okay?" Lucas asked. I turned to him. He was watching me with an expression I had never let myself interpret before. It was not the professional concern of a lawyer. It was the fierce, protective intensity of a man who would burn the world down to keep me warm. "I am," I said, surprised by the honesty of the words. "I actually am. I feel awake." Lucas stood up and walked over to me. He did not touch me, but his presence was a physical weight, grounding and solid. He picked up the bottle of wine and poured a splash more into my glass. "You were incredible today," he said quietly. "I have known you my whole life. Imogen, I have seen you build skyscrapers. I have seen you negotiate with unions. But I have never seen you like this." "Like what?" I asked. "Like a queen who just remembered she owns the kingdom," he said. He handed me the glass. His fingers brushed mine, a lingering contact that sent a jolt of electricity through my arm, far more potent than the shock of the slap earlier. "The war is not over," Lucas reminded me gently. "Tomorrow, the lawyers will descend, the assets need to be seized, the board needs to be restructured, the press will be camping at the gate." "Let them come," I said, taking a sip of the wine. The taste was sharp and bold. "I am done hiding in the background. Lucas, Vanguardia is mine. My name is on the door, and from now on, everyone is going to know exactly who built this house." I looked at the trending hashtags on the screen one last time. House decoration strikes back. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first one in a long time. Being a decoration is not so bad, I mused. After all, the diamond is the hardest substance on earth. They just forgot that you cannot break a diamond with a hammer. You just shatter the hammer. The Monday following the purge felt less like the start of a business week and more like a necessary exorcism. The air in the Vanguardia Tower was different. The cloying scent of Sierra's vanilla perfume and the oppressive fog of Julian's anxiety were gone, replaced by the crisp, clean smell of filtered air and ambition. I arrived at 7 in the morning, not as a creative director hiding in the annex, but as the chief executive officer walking through the front doors. My first act was a literal cleansing. I ordered the removal of the hideous neon posters advertising the smart pods in the lobby. I watched as the maintenance crew peeled the cheap vinyl off my beautiful limestone walls, revealing the sleek, timeless stone beneath. It was a metaphor that was too obvious to ignore. The cheap veneer was gone, and the foundation remained. I stood in the center of the lobby and called for Elena. She appeared looking nervous, clutching her mop bucket as if it were a shield. She had clearly expected to be fired, a casualty of the previous week's chaos. "Good morning, Elena," I said. "Good morning, Mrs. Thorne," she whispered, lowering her eyes. "I mean, Ms. Brightwell." "Elena, how long have you worked in this building?" I asked. 15 years. "Ma'am," she replied, "since your father cut the ribbon. And in those 15 years, you have cleaned every floor, every vent, and every corner. Correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good," I said. Then you know the mechanical bones of this building better than the facility manager Julian hired, who sits in his office playing fantasy football all day. As of this morning, he is terminated. I am promoting you to head of facilities and maintenance. You will not be scrubbing floors anymore. Elena, you will be managing the team that does. I need someone who respects this structure to care for it. Elena dropped her mop. Her hands flew to her mouth, and she began to weep. It was not the theatrical, manipulative crying of Sierra. It was the silent, shaking release of a woman who had been invisible for a decade and was finally being seen. "Thank you," she choked out. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," I said gently. "Just keep my building standing." I took the elevator to the top floor. Walking into the CEO's office, Julian's office, was a strange experience. It was a space I had designed, but he had colonized it. He had filled it with trophies he had not earned, photos of him shaking hands with celebrities he did not know, and gadgets he did not understand. It smelled of his cologne, a scent that now triggered a reflex of nausea in my gut. I spent the morning dismantling his shrine. I fired his personal assistant, a young man whose primary qualifications seemed to be his ability to book golf tee times and lie to my face. I fired the VP of sales, a fraternity brother of Julian's, who had spent the last 2 years expensing strip club visits as client entertainment. By noon, the office was quiet. I was alone with the physical remnants of my marriage. I began to clear out his desk. It was a heavy mahogany piece, an antique from the 19th century that he had insisted on using because he thought it made him look like a tycoon. I emptied the drawers, breath mints, Xanax prescriptions, a stack of overdue parking tickets. It was the detritus of a disorganized mind. I reached for the bottom drawer. It was locked. I did not look for a key. I took a heavy brass letter opener from the desktop and jammed it into the mechanism, with a sharp twist and a satisfying crack of splintering wood. The lock gave way. Inside, I expected to find more evidence of his infidelity, perhaps jewelry receipts or illicit photos. But there was only a small, wooden box. I opened it. Inside was a stack of letters. They were old. The paper slightly yellowed at the edges. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was precise, architectural, and elegant. It was Lucas's handwriting. I frowned, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I picked up the first envelope. It was addressed to me. Imogen Brightwell, at my university dormitory address. The postmark was from 12 years ago. The seal was broken. But I had never received this letter. I pulled out the folded page. Dear Imogen, I watched you present your thesis today. You were radiant, not just beautiful, though you know. I think you are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, but brilliant. The way you speak about structure and light changes the way I see the world. I know Julian is the one standing next to you right now. I know he is the one holding your hand, but I had to write this, just once, to tell you that if he ever lets go, if he ever fails to see the genius that you are, I will be waiting. I have loved you since the first day of Architecture 101. I suspect I will love you until the buildings we design turn to dust. Yours always. Lucas, I gasped, the air leaving my lungs. I picked up the next letter, and the next. There were 5 of them, spanning 3 years. Each one was a confession of love, a promise of support, a quiet observation of my life from the sidelines. Julian told me today that you are engaged. One letter read, he laughed about how he convinced you to let him take credit for the library project. It took everything in me not to strike him. I am stepping back. Imogen, not because I do not love you, but because you seem happy, and I cannot be the one to break your heart by showing you who he really is. But I am keeping these. I am keeping my love safe, just in case. I stared at the paper, my vision blurring. Julian had stolen these. He must have intercepted them from my mailbox in college. Or perhaps he had stolen them from Lucas's room. He had known. He had known for over a decade that Lucas loved me, and instead of confronting it, he had hidden the evidence. He had kept these letters as a trophy, a sick reminder that he had won the prize that the better man wanted. I looked up, and through the glass walls of my office, I saw Lucas in the conference room. He was reviewing contracts, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was wearing a white shirt, his sleeves rolled up, revealing the strong forearms of a man who boxed at dawn. He had been there for 12 years. He had been right there. He had watched me marry a fraud. He had watched me diminish myself. He had cleaned up Julian's messes, and he had never said a word, because he thought I was happy. He had sacrificed his own chance at love to protect my illusion of it. I placed the letters gently into my purse. This was not a conversation for an office. This was a conversation for a lifetime. My reverie was broken by the harsh buzzing of the intercom. It was Marcus, the head of security. "Ms. Brightwell," Marcus said, his voice urgent. "You need to come to the police station, the 19th precinct." "Why?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "We just caught an intruder at your lake house residence," Marcus said. "The new silent alarm system you installed yesterday worked perfectly. The police have him in custody." "Who was it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It was Mr. Thorne," Marcus replied. "He broke a window. He was trying to remove the storm over the Atlantic painting from the study." I closed my eyes. Of course, the Turner painting. It was worth $4 million. It was my mother's favorite piece. Even in his downfall, Julian was trying to steal pieces of my soul to pawn for cash. "I am on my way," I said. The interrogation room at the 19th precinct was a stark, fluorescent-lit box that smelled of stale coffee and despair. Julian sat on the other side of the metal table. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 24 hours. His bespoke suit was wrinkled and stained with dirt from my garden. His hands were cuffed to the table. He had not shaved, and his eyes were bloodshot and wild. When I walked in, flanked by Lucas and my divorce attorney, Julian looked up. He did not look sorry. He looked furious. "You changed the codes," he spat. "I tried the keypad. You changed the codes. It is not your house anymore." "Julian," I said. Sitting down opposite him, I placed a folder on the table. "You do not live there. Breaking a window to enter is called burglary." "I needed the money," he shouted, rattling the handcuffs. "They froze my accounts. I have nothing. I just wanted one painting. You have dozens. You are so greedy. Imogen, you have everything. And you would not let me have one scrap." "That painting belonged to my mother," I said coldly. "And you were going to sell it to pay off a gambling debt." Julian slumped back in his chair. "You do not understand," he whined, his voice taking on that familiar, self-pitying tone. "You do not know what it is like. The pressure, my God, the pressure of being Mr. Imogen Brightwell. Everyone looking at me, judging me. Is he good enough for her? Did he marry her for the money? I had to prove them wrong. I had to be big. I had to take risks to show I was a tycoon too. It is society's fault. It is your father's fault for casting such a big shadow. I was a victim of expectations." I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. The anger was gone. The betrayal was gone. There was only the clinical detachment of a surgeon looking at a tumor that had been successfully removed. "Stop it," I said. My voice was quiet, but it silenced him instantly. "Stop lying to yourself. Julian, there was no pressure. My father liked you. I loved you. We gave you every tool, every opportunity, and every safety net a human being could ask for. You did not steal and cheat because you were oppressed. You did not abuse your staff because you were stressed." I leaned forward, looking deep into his watery, weak eyes. "You did those things because you are small," I said. "You are a small, the hollow man who wanted to sit on a throne, but refused to bear the weight of the crown. You resented me not because I pressured you, but because my existence reminded you of your own mediocrity. You hated me because I was the real thing. And you knew, deep down, you were just a forgery." Julian stared at me, his mouth open. The truth hit him harder than any slap. He had spent his life building a narrative of victimhood, and I had just dismantled it with a few sentences. I opened the folder, Inside were the divorce papers. "Sign them," I said. "No alimony, no settlement. You keep your debt, I keep my company. And if you sign now, I will ask the district attorney not to pursue the burglary charge. You will still go to prison for the embezzlement, but I will not add breaking and entering to the list." Julian looked at the pen. He looked at me. He saw the granite wall of my resolve. With a shaking hand, he picked up the pen and scrawled his signature. It was over. "Take him away," I said to the guard. As the officer began to unlock Julian from the table, the door to the holding area burst open. A commotion spilled into the hallway. "Let me see him. He is my husband. Sort of." It was Sierra. She looked deranged. She was wearing a tracksuit that looked like she had slept in it. Her hair was matted, and her makeup was smeared across her face like war paint. She had clearly been waiting in the lobby and had somehow pushed past the desk sergeant. She saw Julian being led out of the interrogation room. "Julian," she screamed, rushing toward him. "You have to help me. The police came to my apartment. They took everything, my bags, my shoes. They said I have to pay back the $3 million. I do not have it. You spent it?" Julian stopped. He looked at the girl he had destroyed his life for, and then he snapped. "You," he roared. A guttural, animalistic sound tore from his throat. "You did this. You and your stupid phone. You and your live stream. If you had just shut your mouth, I would still be a CEO. I would still be rich." "You promised me," Sierra shrieked, clawing at his chest. "You said you were the king. You are a loser. You are a broke, pathetic loser." "Get away from me," Julian yelled. He lunged at her, even in handcuffs. His rage was formidable. He headbutted her, a clumsy, violent motion. Sierra screamed and scratched his face, drawing blood. "I hate you," she screamed. "I hope you die in jail." "I wish I had never met you," he bellowed back. They fell to the floor, a tangle of limbs and hatred. The former CEO and the former influencer, rolling on the dirty linoleum of a police station, biting and spitting at each other like rabid dogs. It was grotesque. It was pathetic. It was the truest representation of their relationship I had ever seen. The officers rushed in, pulling them apart. "Get off him." She bit me. "He is a liar." I watched them for a moment longer. I watched the man I had married spitting blood at a woman he had claimed to love yesterday. I watched the woman who had called me a decoration being dragged away in handcuffs, screaming obscenities. I turned to Lucas. He was standing by the door, holding my coat. He did not look at the fight. He was looking at me, checking to see if I was okay. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said, turning my back on the chaos. "I am ready to go home." We walked out of the precinct and into the cold night air. The wind was still blowing, but the sky had cleared. Above the city lights, the stars were visible, sharp and bright. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the freezing air. It tasted like freedom. I had cleared the rot. I had secured the foundation, and for the first time in years, I was ready to build something new. The silence in the conference room was not the peace of victory. It was the hush of a suffocating vacuum. Just when I thought the dust had settled, just when I thought the rot of Julian Thorne had been scrubbed from the walls of Vanguardia. The courier arrived. He delivered a single, thick envelope from a law firm representing the Obsidian Group. Inside was a legal grenade that threatened to level everything I had fought to save. It was an injunction, a cease and desist order, and a lawsuit for damages totaling $200 million. The accusation was breathtaking in its audacity. Obsidian Group claimed that Vanguardia Design had stolen the intellectual property for the Helios project from them. They claimed that my life's work, the solar-integrated skyscraper that would redefine sustainable architecture, was their original creation, and that I was the thief. "This is impossible," Lucas said, pacing the length of the room, his tie discarded on the table. "We have the timestamps. We have the original CAD files. We have your sketches from 3 years ago. Read the technical filing." "Lucas," I said, my voice dangerously calm, I was staring at the blueprints Obsidian had submitted as evidence. They do not just have the concept, they have the source code, they have the structural algorithms, they have the exact wind load calculations I ran on my private server 6 months ago. They have everything, down to the millimeter. Lucas stopped pacing. He looked at the server logs on the screen. "Julian," he whispered. It was a dead man's switch. I realized, the cold logic falling into place. Before I fired him, before he was arrested, he must have installed a backdoor. He set it to upload the entire Helios database to Obsidian's servers the moment his biometric access was revoked. He sold them the keys to the castle. The situation was catastrophic. Obsidian was a massive conglomerate with pockets deep enough to drown us in litigation for a decade. If they successfully blocked the Helios project, Vanguardia would default on our construction loans. We would be bankrupt in 90 days. I would lose the company, my father's legacy, and my reputation. I would go down in history not as a visionary, but as a fraud who stole from her competitors. "We have 48 hours, Lucas said, checking his watch. "The emergency injunction hearing is on Wednesday morning. If we cannot prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this design is yours, the judge will shut us down." "Then we work," I said. "Lock the doors. Nobody leaves." For the next 2 days, we lived in the war room. We drank stale coffee and ate cold pizza. We combed through terabytes of data, looking for a fingerprint, a mistake, anything that proved Obsidian had copied us and not the other way around. But Julian had been thorough. The data transfer was clean, to an outsider. It looked like 2 identical files created at the same time. By 3 o'clock on the morning of the hearing, Lucas was slumped over his laptop, rubbing his eyes. "Imogen, it is a deadlock. Their files are identical to ours. It is going to come down to he said, she said, and they have a team of 20 lawyers." I was standing at the window, looking out at the sleeping city. I was exhausted, my eyes burning, but my mind was racing. I thought about the nature of creation. A copyist copies the what. A creator understands the why. I walked over to the large drafting table where the physical blueprints of the Helios Foundation were spread out. I traced the lines of the load-bearing columns. I closed my eyes, remembering the night I designed this foundation. It was the anniversary of my mother's death. I had been grieving, and I had poured that grief into the geometry. "Lucas," I said softly, "come here." He walked over, standing beside me. "What is it?" "Look at the foundation grid," I said, pointing to the complex web of steel reinforcements in the sub-basement level. "What do you see?" "I see a standard seismic-resistant distribution array," Lucas said. "High-tensile steel, cross-bracing." "Look closer," I commanded. "Look at the negative space between the columns in Sector 4. Lucas leaned in, squinting. He traced the empty spaces with his finger. Slowly, his eyes widened. "It is a shape," he whispered. "It looks like petals." "It is a rose," I said. My mother's name was Rose. I designed the stress distribution matrix to form the abstract shape of a rose when viewed from above. It was a secret tribute to her, a signature hidden in the concrete where no one would ever see it. "This is it," Lucas said, excitement rising in his voice. "This proves you designed it." "No," I said, a smile touching my lips for the first time in days. "It proves something much better, because, Lucas, you cannot just arrange steel columns into the shape of a flower and expect the building to stand up. The rose creates a massive structural imbalance in Sector 4. It weakens the eastern quadrant by 15%. Lucas looked at me, horrified. "You designed a building that would fall down." "No," I said. "I compensated for the rose by adding a hidden counterweight system in the penthouse mechanical room. It is a dense tungsten block disguised as a water tank. It balances the torque perfectly. It is listed in the plumbing schematics, not the structural ones." I pulled up Obsidian's blueprints on the screen, the ones they claimed were their original work. If they stole the structural files but did not understand the personal significance of the rose, I said. Did they also steal the plumbing files for the water tank? Lucas frantically tapped on the keyboard. Bringing up Obsidian's submission, he scrolled to the penthouse level. It is empty, Lucas breathed. They have the standard HVAC units, no tungsten block, no counterweight, which means, I said, the thrill of victory surging through my veins, that if they build their version of my tower, the moment the wind hits 40 miles per hour, the torque from the rose imbalance will shear the foundation pins. The building will collapse, Lucas finished. Exactly, I said. They did not just steal my design, they stole a death trap. The courtroom was packed. The air conditioning was humming, but the atmosphere was stiflingly hot. Obsidian's legal team sat on the left, a phalanx of expensive suits looking smug. Their lead architect, a man named Mr. Blackwood, sat with them, looking bored. I sat on the right, with Lucas. I wore a suit of sharp, white architectural wool. I looked like the steel I worked with. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on her nose, peered over the bench. This is an emergency hearing regarding intellectual property theft. The plaintiff, Obsidian Group, claims the defendant, Vanguardia Design, has infringed on their copyright. Mr. Sterling, you may present your defense. Lucas stood up. Your Honor, we do not intend to argue copyright today. We intend to argue public safety. The judge frowned. Explain. We believe that the designs submitted by Obsidian Group are not only stolen, but they are also fundamentally flawed and dangerous, Lucas said. I would like to call Ms. Imogen Brightwell to the stand to demonstrate. I walked to the witness box. I did not look at the Obsidian lawyers. I looked directly at Mr. Blackwood. Miss Brightwell, Lucas asked. You claim to be the sole author of the Helios project. I am, I stated, and you are familiar with the design submitted by Obsidian Group. I am. It is a pixel-perfect copy of my work. Objection, the Obsidian lawyer shouted. Conjecture. I can prove it, I said calmly. Mr. Blackwood, could you please explain the structural logic behind the column arrangement in the sub-basement, specifically Sector 4? Mr. Blackwood stood up, looking annoyed. It is a standard load distribution grid. It is designed to maximize stability. Is that so? I asked. Then why is it shaped like a rose? Mr. Blackwood blinked. Excuse me. The columns, I said. They form the shape of a rose. Why did you design it that way? Mr. Blackwood? He stammered. He looked at his blueprints. He had never noticed the shape. He had just copied the data. It is just an aesthetic choice, a geometric pattern. An aesthetic choice in a sub-basement buried 50 feet underground, I asked. Interesting. And tell me, how did you compensate for the 15% torque imbalance that this aesthetic choice creates? The room went silent. Mr. Blackwood began to sweat. There is no imbalance. Our calculations are perfect. Your Honor, I said, turning to the judge. I designed that anomaly as a tribute to my late mother. Rose, it creates a critical structural weakness. In my design, this is countered by a 20-ton tungsten counterweight installed in the penthouse. Disguised within the plumbing schematics, I would like the court to examine Obsidian's blueprints for the penthouse. I pointed to the large screen in the courtroom. As you can see, their penthouse has no counterweight. If this building is constructed according to the plans Obsidian claims are theirs, it will collapse within 6 months of completion. It will kill thousands of people. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge looked at the Obsidian team. Is this true? Mr. Blackwood was frantically flipping through his papers. The plumbing is a separate contractor. You copied the structure, but you missed the soul, I said, my voice ringing with authority. You stole the what, but you did not understand the why, and that ignorance makes you not just thieves, but negligent architects. The judge slammed her gavel. Mr. Blackwood, can you explain the lack of counterweight? He could not. He crumbled, under pressure. He admitted they had received the files from an anonymous source and rushed them into production to beat Vanguardia to market. He admitted they had not run their own stress tests. "The source," Lucas interjected. "We have traced the digital signature of the upload. It came from a laptop registered to Mr. Julian Thorne." The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 2 federal marshals walked in. Julian was sitting in the back row. He had come to watch my demise. He had come to gloat. He was wearing a hat and sunglasses, trying to be inconspicuous, but his vanity had demanded he witness his victory. Instead, he was witnessing his funeral. "Julian Thorne," the marshal announced, "you are under arrest for economic espionage, violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and grand larceny." Julian jumped up, his face a mask of terror. "No, it wasn't me, I was just a consultant. They paid me. They said it was legal. You installed a virus on the server of a company you no longer worked for," I said from the stand. "You stole trade secrets and sold them to a competitor, and you almost caused a structural catastrophe." Julian looked at me. He looked at the handcuffs the marshals were pulling from their belts. He looked at the Obsidian lawyers who were now actively distancing themselves from him, looking at him with disgust. "Imogen," he screamed as the marshals grabbed him. "Help me. I did it for us. I wanted to show you I could make money. I wanted to be your equal." "You were never my equal, Julian," I said, my voice devoid of pity. "You were just a flaw in the design." They dragged him out. His screams echoed in the hallway long after the doors swung shut. The judge looked at the Obsidian team. Her face was dark with fury. "The injunction is lifted immediately. Case dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring Obsidian Group to the Architectural Licensing Board for review of gross negligence. You will pay the defendants legal fees and damages for this frivolous suit." It was over. The gavel banged, a sound of finality that rang sweeter than any music. I stepped down from the witness box. My legs felt a little shaky, not from fear, but from the release of the immense tension I had been carrying. I had saved my company, I had saved my legacy, and I had finally, truly, defeated the man who tried to destroy me. Lucas was waiting for me at the gate. He did not say a word. He simply held out his hand. I looked at his hand, strong, steady, the hand of a man who built things rather than destroyed them. I took it. We walked down the center aisle of the courtroom together. The press was waiting outside, a sea of cameras and microphones. They wanted a statement. They wanted the drama. "Imogen, Imogen," they shouted. "How do you feel? What happens to Vanguardia now?" I stopped on the courthouse steps. The sun was shining, bright and clear. I looked at the cameras. "Vanguardia stands," I said simply, "because it was built on a foundation of truth, and truth does not crumble." I felt Lucas squeeze my hand. I looked up at him. He was smiling, a genuine, proud smile that reached his eyes. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "We have a skyscraper to build." I turned back to the cameras, pulling Lucas closer to my side so that the world could see us standing together, 2 architects of a new future. I was no longer the decoration. I was the architect. And I was finally building a life that would last. Time has a way of rewriting skylines, both in a city and in a soul. It had been exactly 2 years since the gavel fell in that courtroom, sealing the fate of the man who tried to destroy me and opening the door to the life I was always meant to live. I stood on the observation deck of the Helios Tower, the wind whipping through my hair, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel the chill. The structure beneath my feet was living, breathing proof of my resilience. The Helios project had not just succeeded, it had redefined sustainable architecture. It had won the Pritzker Prize, the highest honor in our field, and solidified Vanguardia Design as the premier firm in the hemisphere. We were no longer known for the scandal of a corrupt CEO. We were known for the genius of our work. The view from the 95th floor was breathtaking. Chicago spread out below me like a grid of diamonds and steel, bathed in the golden light of a late autumn afternoon. I placed my hand on the glass railing. Feeling the subtle vibration of the building, it was humming. The tungsten counterweight in the penthouse, the secret heart I had designed to balance my mother's rose, was working perfectly. The tower was stable, the foundation was secure, far away from this height, in a place where the sun rarely touched the floor. Julian Thorne was learning the true meaning of structural failure. He was currently serving year 2 of a 15-year sentence at a federal correctional institution in Wisconsin. The reality of prison had been a brutal shock to his system. Julian had entered thinking his charm and his stories of being a CEO would buy him status. He thought he could manipulate the other inmates just as he had manipulated the board of directors. He was wrong. In prison, men value loyalty and strength, 2 things Julian never possessed. When he tried to brag about his past, about the millions he stole and the women he conquered, the other men did not look at him with admiration. They looked at him with disgust. They knew he was a man who had stolen from his wife and gambled away his parents' home. He was isolated, ostracized by the general population, and forced to work in the laundry detail for 12 cents an hour. I had heard through Arthur Vance, who kept tabs on the situation, that Julian spent his nights writing letters. He wrote to investors who no longer remembered his name. He wrote to fair-weather friends who had blocked his number, and sometimes he started letters to me. But he never sent them. Perhaps, in the silence of his cell, surrounded by the cold concrete that was so different from the marble he coveted, he finally understood that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. He lived in a prison of regret, haunted by the memory of the woman he had called a decoration, realizing too late that she was the only reason he had ever shone at all. And then there was Sierra, the girl who had once dreamed of being a Manhattan socialite, who had believed that youth and audacity were a substitute for substance, had also found her new level. She was not in prison, but she was in her own kind of purgatory, after the lawsuit stripped her of every designer bag, every shoe, and every cent of the stolen money. Sierra had been left with nothing but a mountain of debt and a destroyed reputation. No respectable company would hire her. Her face was too recognizable, her name synonymous with the viral humiliation of the slap. She had moved back to a small suburb, far away from the glamour of the city. She found work at a discount nail salon in a strip mall, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a vape shop. I could imagine her there, sitting on a low stool, filing the calloused feet of strangers. The smell of acrylic chemicals would be thick in the air, replacing the vanilla perfume she used to bathe in. Just last week, a friend of mine had been in that very area and stopped in for a quick manicure. She told me she saw Sierra. She said Sierra kept her head down, wearing a mask not just for hygiene, but to hide. My friend overheard 2 customers reading a magazine in the waiting area. "Did you see this article about Imogen Brightwell?" one customer asked. "She is the woman of the year. So inspiring." "Oh, I love her," the other replied. "Remember that scandal a few years ago? Her husband cheated on her with that stupid intern. What was her name? Sierra something God? She was dumb. Imagine having it all and throwing it away because you thought you were better than the wife. What a joke." Sierra had to sit there, buffing nails, listening to strangers call her a joke. She had to swallow her pride, nod, and say, "Water or tea?" because she needed the tip. That was her punishment. She was forced to live an ordinary, invisible life, serving others, with the constant reminder that she had grasped for the stars and fallen into the mud. I took a deep breath, letting the image of them fade. They were the past. They were dust. I was the present. The sound of the elevator doors sliding open behind me broke my reverie. I turned to see Lucas walking across the rooftop terrace. He looked different than he had 2 years ago. The tension that used to live in his shoulders was gone. He was no longer just the general counsel fighting fires. He was the chief operating officer of Vanguardia. But more than that, he was my partner, in every sense of the word. He was wearing a charcoal suit, the jacket unbuttoned, his tie loose, the wind caught his dark hair, and as he looked at me, his eyes crinkled with that warmth that always made me feel like I was coming home. "I thought I might find you up here," Lucas said, walking over to join me at the railing. The reception downstairs is asking for the guest of honor. The mayor wants to shake your hand again. Let him wait, I said, smiling. I like the view from here. It reminds me of what we built. Lucas looked out at the city, then turned his gaze to me. We did build something incredible, didn't we? But you know, Imogen, this tower is not the most impressive thing I have seen you build. No, I asked, raising an eyebrow. It is 80 stories of carbon-neutral engineering. What beats that? You, he said simply. I watched you rebuild yourself. I watched you take a pile of rubble and turn it into a fortress. You are the strongest structure I know. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, a feeling that made me feel girlish and light. I had a good engineer helping me, I whispered. Lucas reached into his pocket. His expression shifted, becoming serious, tender, and intensely focused. He turned his body fully toward me. Imogen, he began, his voice dropping an octave. For 16 years, I stood in the background. I watched you from a distance because I thought that was what love required. I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought it meant silence. He took my left hand in his. His skin was warm and rough against mine. But these last 2 years have taught me that I was wrong. He continued, Love is not silent. Love is loud. Love is standing next to you in the courtroom. Love is fighting for your legacy. Love is making sure you never have to question your worth again. He dropped to one knee. My breath hitched in my throat. The wind seemed to stop. The noise of the city below faded into nothing. There was only Lucas, kneeling on the roof of the world, looking up at me with a devotion that spanned decades. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. It was not a traditional ring. It was a masterpiece of design. The band was made of brushed platinum, interwoven with a strand of rose gold. In the center, held in a tension setting that defied gravity, was a flawless, emerald-cut diamond, but it was the structure of the setting that made me gasp. It mimicked the cross-bracing of the Helios Tower. It was a ring built like a skyscraper. I designed it myself, Lucas said, his eyes searching mine. It represents resilience. It represents the way you hold everything together. Imogen Brightwell, you are not a decoration. You are the foundation of my life. Will you marry me? Tears pricked my eyes, hot and happy. I looked at the ring, then at the man. I thought about Julian, who had given me a flashy rock to show off his own status. Lucas had given me a symbol of who I was. Yes, I whispered, then louder. Yes, Lucas, yes. He stood up and slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled me into his arms, and as his lips met mine, I felt a sense of completion that I had never known was possible. It was not the fiery, anxious passion I had felt for Julian. It was something deeper. It was the feeling of a keystone locking into an arch. It was stability. It was safety. It was real. We were married 3 months later. We did not have a grand cathedral wedding. We did not invite the press. We chose a small, private garden on the shores of Lake Geneva. It was just us, our families, and the people who truly mattered, people like Elena, who sat in the front row wiping her eyes, and Marcus, who stood guard at the gate with a wide grin. I wore a dress of simple white silk, structured and elegant. As I walked down the aisle toward Lucas, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was no longer the heiress trying to please a demanding board. I was no longer the wife trying to shrink herself for a fragile husband. I was Imogen Brightwell. I was a woman of grace, for I had walked through fire without losing my kindness. I was a woman of wealth, not just in money, but in spirit and legacy. And finally, I was a woman of real love. As we exchanged vows, I looked into Lucas's eyes and saw my future reflected there. It was a future of partnership, of shared sketches on the breakfast table, of quiet evenings by the fire, of building a life stone by stone, together. And now, here I am. The reception is winding down. The sun is beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of violet and burnt orange. I am standing alone for a moment by the large glass doors of the terrace. looking at my reflection. The woman in the glass smiles back at me. She is glowing. She rests a hand gently on her stomach, where a new life is just beginning to flutter. I am 4 months pregnant. We found out last week. It is a girl. We are going to name her Rose, after the mother who gave me the secret strength to survive. I reach into my clutch and pull out my phone. I scroll through the contacts until I find a number that has been blocked for 2 years. Julian Thorne. For a long time, I kept it, not because I wanted to call him, but because it felt like a scar I needed to acknowledge. It was a reminder of the mistake I had made. But tonight, looking at the ring on my finger and feeling the life inside me, I realize I do not need reminders anymore. The scar has healed. The skin is new. I press edit. I select the contact. I press delete. Are you sure you want to delete this contact? The screen asks. I smile. I have never been more sure of anything. I tap yes. The name vanishes. The last tether to the past is severed. I turn off the phone completely. The screen goes black, reflecting the sunset. I do not need the digital world tonight. I do not need the validation of strangers or the noise of business. I look up and see Lucas waiting for me by the garden gate. He holds out his hand, just as he did in the courtroom, just as he has done every day since we started this journey. "Coming, Mrs. Sterling," he calls out softly. "I am coming," I reply. I walk toward him, the gravel crunching softly under my shoes. I take his hand, and together, we walk out of the garden and into the warm, golden light of the rest of our lives. The house decoration has finally found her home, and it is built on the only rock that matters: love. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminded you that no matter how much people try to diminish you, your true value is something they can never take away. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you in a bustling city like Chicago, or somewhere quiet and peaceful? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Julian's karma. Did he get what he deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Crimson Drama Stories channel, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need a little inspiration to find their own strength. Until next time, stay strong and keep building your own empire.